Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So workers at the Frito-Lay plant in Topeka, Kansas, they've been on strike since July 5th. And like any strike, it comes down to wages, hours, conditions, and hours being a big part of this. Some of the stories that you've heard of people working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, 84 hours a week for months, not just on the, hey, occasionally that happens, but week after week after week. You hear stories of the heat, basically wiping people out. And look, we hear these stories a lot. Should we be surprised by them? No, because I talk to people every day who go through stuff like this. The difference is these folks have said no more. We're going to draw a line in the stand. We're hitting the picket line, and we want better. I understand as we speak, they're voting on a potential agreement, so the strike could end. But from what the early indication, I'm not sure, considering the local leadership didn't endorse it. And here to share some thoughts on what's going on out there in Topeka, Kansas, I've asked Alex Press to come talk with us. She's a staff writer with Jacobin magazine. She's been following this story from the beginning. Alex, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks so much for having me on.
So you see these stories, people working 84 hours a week in these horrible conditions. And my first thought is how has it gotten this bad? Why did you allow it to get to this point? How did it get this bad?
That's a great question. I mean, part of the story, of course, is that some people want some level of overtime, right? People aren't paid enough per hour in this country. A lot of people want to be able to make more money. That itself is a reflection of the pay being too low, which is why, as you mentioned, one of the demands here is for a significant raise, not just 2% a year, which is what the company's offering. So that's part of it. It's also about a union that hasn't been fighting. It's in a right to work state. It's incredibly hard to organize new shops and to service the ones that exist. And so that's another part of the story. Frito-Lay is also an incredibly anti-union company. One thing I hadn't realized until I started talking to workers and reporting this story was that, for example, Frito-Lay offers paternity leave for all workers in its non-union shops. The only shops that don't get that are the union shops. So It is punishing workers for having a union. It is trying to get them to decertify their unions and give away the one bargaining chip that they have. So that's part of the story of how it gets here. And I think there's a re-energized local leadership. And I think there's workers who've seen things get so bad that they can't take it anymore during the coronavirus pandemic, where production has been through the roof at this plant. And that all leads up to this explosion where they're voting down proposed contracts and they're finally saying, you know what, we're going on strike.
No, and the thing that's getting me, and the thing that gives me hope, as someone who's been a labor guy for years, is that we're seeing more people saying, you know what, we're mad as hell and we're not taking it anymore. We're not going to work 84 hours a week. We're not working for poverty wages in desperate conditions. And we're seeing more people going on strike. And I think that's a good thing.
I think it's a great thing. I mean, conditions have gotten so incredibly bad. You don't have to be a radical to see that workers absolutely need more leverage and more power for the sake of everybody. And so I think, in the case of Topeka, we see what we see all across the country in other industries and other shops, which is that the coronavirus really sort of pushed people over the edge. Things have been so bad for working class people in this country for decades, but they've gotten even worse, right? So in Topeka, workers will talk about how during coronavirus, they watched their managers being able to sit in air-conditioned offices while on the shop floor, the heat was 100 degrees Fahrenheit at 7 a.m, right? And only got worse in the kitchens. They watched management being able to work from home while they were coming into this production plant when there was coronavirus outbreaks on the shop floor and there were dangerous, hazardous working conditions. And so it's that sort of thing that I think pushes people. And so, yeah, we're seeing it all across all sorts of industries and across the country, but we're definitely seeing it in Topeka as well.
Yeah, and all we keep hearing about is that people whining that there's a labor shortage, and that nobody wants to work anymore. Alex, they're all lazy.
Right. I mean, it's interesting how this is playing out at this plant. For example, it's about 850 people who work there. And when you talk to them, they say that the company is intentionally understaffing, right? It's not that they would have to offer incredibly high wages to attract people. This plant is paying lower than the various other warehouses in the region. There's a Goodyear plant up the street, for example, that pays better wages. There's all sorts of other options. But Frito-Lay won't budge, right? Because they don't want to outlay more on the benefits and wages and risk that they would have to take by employing people. So instead they understaff, they force turnover. That's another big part of this story, is that they're trying to get people out the door who have seniority so that they can bring in workers with lower wages and with no benefits. And importantly, workers who don't know what their rights are on the shop floor, who won't demand anything when their rights are violated, say when they're disciplined for something that wasn't their fault, which is another demand that they have in the contract. They want a different disciplinary regime.
No, and all of these things, and especially being a right to work state, they wanted that constant churn, so there's no solidarity. Which again, why I think the PRO Act has to pass. How we have to get rid of these insane no rights at work laws that keep people pitted against one another. Because look, I'm in Pennsylvania, where I fear we're the next no rights at work state in 2023. Something needs to be done. But the fact that you've highlighted that you've got this division. That's exactly what the employer class wants. They want people pitted against each other, so they're not looking at them. And a perfect example of that is Amazon. I mean, you look at what they did in Bessemer, spent $200 million on a campaign that I didn't think they were going to win from the beginning, and did all of the horrible things that you and I both know every employer does. But I think finally people are lifting their heads and being aware of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, Amazon is a great example. It's obviously what I spend most of my time writing and talking about. And it's exactly that. It's about, can you lower expectations enough among workers and make them see each other as competing, opponents in a war for scarcity, right? And Amazon did that in Bessemer. It did it with an anti-union campaign, and also threatened and scared people by saying, if you demand better, you couldn't possibly win. All you'll do is close this warehouse, right? We'll move elsewhere. We'll give up here. And so you make it so that workers don't feel they have any other options but to turn against one another. I mean, this was really illustrated in Bessemer in this anecdote about how there was a jail nearby. And so often there were people who had records who were having trouble getting jobs. And Amazon, during the union vote, would bring those workers on. They weren't eligible to be in the bargaining unit, to be in the union. And they would outfit them with swag. They would walk around on the shop floor in the warehouse with vote no pins. And they would be a human embodiment of the war that employers are waging, where they pit workers who have even less rights than those who might be in unions against one another, right? And the only result is discord and weakness for everyone.
Yeah, as one person we had on talk about it said that basically the old school sandwich boards. You had all these people who couldn't get jobs, and they outfitted them with old school sandwich boards to continue to send that anti-union message in a place where I didn't even think they really had to, because again, Alabama's another one of these no rights at work states, where you didn't have to join the union anyway. And it's incredible to me that Amazon would have put up that kind of a fight. Other than it's really about power and control and nothing else.
It always is. I mean, this is the one thing that I feel like when people start reading about a union fight or the labor movement, they really don't understand. Why would a company spend so much money on something that often wouldn't cost them that much? A union, maybe that might get a little bit of a higher raise, but it's so about control, right? Amazon's entire business model relies on absolute domination, a dictatorship in the workplace, that you can hire and fire at will, that no one has the right to speak back or say no or demand anything better. And, that's the flexibility that everyone loves about Amazon, is that actually workers are pushed and pulled to the breaking point. And again, that is exactly what's going on in Topeka. I mean, workers here, as you said, when you introduced this story, are literally dying. People have had heart attacks on the shop floor, and they allege that Frito-Lay told them to basically move the body and keep working. People speak about suicide regularly in a way that takes no prodding at all. And people also talk about divorces in general, sort of discord at home. Because again, imagine if your spouse is working 84 hours a week, he's not taking care of the kids. There's going to be problems if that's what's happening. And so again, this is really a life and death matter.
No, it is. And this is not just in Kansas, this is in states all across the country. Because I remember, when I first entered the workforce some 30 years ago, those were prime jobs. Those were good union jobs. Those were family sustaining wage jobs. And you hear how far they've fallen because the pendulum of power has moved to the employer. You're talking about back to desperation wages.
Right. I mean, that is what is happening here. It's an obviously extreme example, what's happening with the hours at Topeka, but across the board, it's true that workers have increasingly lost the little bit of leverage that they had on the shop floor and at the legal level. This is part of what the argument for the PRO Act is that also has to change at the legal level of labor law. But the result is just there's no one having any leverage at all, and employers are doing as they please. I mean, one worker I spoke to in Topeka, I asked him, did he think that the company treats the machinery better than it treats the workers? And he said yes. And I think that applies. That is a feeling certainly that Amazon workers voice all the time, that they're treated like robots, that in fact they are treated worse than Amazon's robots. And so I think that is a generalized sentiment where employers have divested themselves of any sense that they have to care for their workers. In fact, they're just using them and throwing them away.
Yeah, but now, talking about Amazon, they're spending tons of money on PR, and I'm sure you see this more than anyone, telling how wonderful they are, how they give college money, how they create all these wonderful jobs. And I'm going, but here's the thing. I remember warehouse jobs back when I first started working. In today's dollars, we're paying almost double what you're paying with better benefits and much better working conditions. Sorry, I'm not buying.
Yeah, I mean, this is the trick that unfortunately a lot of journalists fall for in mainstream media. Even now, after they've seen, years of Amazon workers complaining about this, they compare Amazon to, say, a fast food restaurant. And they say, well, if the starting wage is $15 an hour, that's pretty good. That's better than $7.25, the federal minimum. But in fact, this is not that industry. This is the warehousing industry. And there, Amazon is paying even now below the average for union or non-union wages. They're paying below the industry standard. In fact, studies show that when Amazon opens up a facility in a county, it brings down the wages at the other facilities too, right? It's so big that it actually sets the terms of labor relations, both in their industry and across the country in other industries as well.
Yeah, it's again, and we've given them that power. And if you watch, and I'm sure you paid attention to the fight for H2Q and all of the information that cities and local municipalities just handed over to Amazon in the hopes of landing one of these headquarters, which you knew they were never getting, but they did all this free work for Amazon that evidently we're still, as taxpayers, not allowed to see.
Yeah, I mean, this was a big part of that. That was obviously a circus, right? I mean, I've described it as, Amazon said jump, and every elected official in the country said, okay, how high? Say for maybe 2 or 3 people. But they got, in that process, not only did they get to demonstrate their power, they got data, which they rely on. That is a key thing that Amazon needs. It's not just labor power, it's also data. And they got that information from so many counties and regions across the country, which even if they were never going to pick those areas, they now have intimate knowledge of what they should and shouldn't do in those areas going forward. As well as they got to humiliate everyone and show just how weak working class people have gotten at this point.
Boy, you are so right on that. Now, in the last Teamsters convention, their 30th convention just wrapped up a couple weeks ago, the Teamsters have come out and said that they're going to put a big push into organizing Amazon, especially their drivers, because ultimately UPS's future is on the line here. If Amazon creates a major competitor, UPS is pretty much done. Do you think it's something possible? I mean, the Teamsters Union's a good-sized union, about 1.4 million members across the country. Given our labor law situation, given the situation that we are in this country, you think that can happen?
I think it has to happen. I mean, when it will happen is a different question. But I mean, for me, the Teamsters jumping into this fight in a sustained way with such a sort of grand vote and this setting up of an Amazon division and putting real resources is absolutely a good thing. The devil's in the details, of course, with any union, including the Teamsters, as far as how that's implemented. But at the end of the day, I mean, the power Amazon has and the way that labor law and the politicians and everything else are stacked against workers at every level of the process of unionizing and winning better wages means that we need every single union. We need everybody involved in the fight. And so I think it's absolutely a good thing. And, I've talked to Teamsters at the rank and file level who've been through these trainings that the Teamsters are putting on that are getting them ready to organize in the Amazon division. And, they're tentatively hopeful. They say that it's serious, that people are actually taking this very seriously, not just out of self-interest, but also the sense that, if you let Amazon carry on in its way, then it's going to control everything. That is the goal, right? I mean, Jeff Bezos just this week was talking about how he can't wait to colonize space. And he was just visiting to check it out before he moves industry up there. So I think the writing is very clear that every union should absolutely be getting involved in trying to win this fight. Whether it's going to happen in the next 5 years, I certainly hope so. I'm doing my best to try to help. But open question for sure.
Yeah, I've been a Teamster for over 30 years, and I've been saying for 30 years, we need to be doing this stuff more because I lived through what was the downfall of the LTL trucking industry after Carter signed deregulation. And, when I started in the LTL industry, it was 85% unionized. Today, it's down to about 10%. And we've lost significant bargaining power for wages, hours, conditions, and things are really sliding backwards. But even that, our industry is still way above everyone else because they've been left behind. So I'm really hoping these organizing and these training sessions do bring people in and make us a much more militant working class.
Right. I mean, that is at the end of the day, the least that needs to happen, right? Whether Amazon can be taken over or not, can actually be unionized, can actually be forced to change its ways, open question. But regardless, the effort has to happen that we actually are creating more militant, more democratic efforts to organize working class people. Because, after the pandemic, as you've said, there's rage, there's outrage, there's strikes actions and walkouts, but there's also incredible disorganization and alienation as people have been isolated more than ever over the past year and have actually been further turned against each other. And so again, I think efforts like this, and it's part of why I focused on Amazon, is in fact, when Amazon provides this opportunity of, in fact, it's brought us all under its roof. We're all in a way a part of Amazon's empire. That is an opportunity too.
Yeah, and you obviously have just started a new podcast, the Primer podcast. You can follow you at Primer Pod. Tell me a little bit about the new podcast.
Yeah. So, I think as anyone listening to this would get a sense, it's very hard to keep track of everything that's going on at Amazon. It touches everything. There's so many different arms. It's both the warehouses, but also the infrastructure of the internet and also all these sort of side projects. It's entering new markets, healthcare, facial technology, recognition technology. And so Primer is just an attempt to sort of be an opening for people who are curious about this information, don't want to keep up with it, and want to learn some basic things about Amazon's business model. So we're doing, episodes that are focused on labor and lots of interviews with workers from both across the United States and also around the world at other Amazon facilities, but also trying to take things a piece at a time. So there's an episode about what is Amazon's finance model? There'll be one about the steel industry and how was it organized? And then how is that relevant to today? There'll be one that compares it to Walmart, right? So trying to make this extremely far-reaching and complicated subject something that's accessible and that you could say, send your friend or your relative and say, hey, check this out. There's an interview with Amazon workers this week.
I hope people will check it out. We'll get links on social media, how people can take a look at it. I think it's important. Real quick, I want to go back to the Frito-Lay thing in Kansas. The vote, obviously, tonight. Any expectations? Any thoughts?
I really don't know how it's going to go. It's, it'll be decided, I think, announced by midnight tonight. But, the local leadership, as you mentioned, is not recommending that it's accepted, right? And so that does signal something. Certainly, I've seen the leaked sort of amendments that are being put in place, the famous suicide shifts that got a lot of attention. Those are going to be out, but the amendment still includes the fact that workers may be forced to work, 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. And it's even unclear if they'll get that seventh day off. So among other things, that's an issue, right? Wages also are still a live issue. And so, I wouldn't dare to tell a worker how to vote, but I would say that it's not certain it's going to pass.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. But Alex, I appreciate you taking time for us. Hope you'll come back and talk to us again soon.
Yeah, happy to come anytime.
Good stuff.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Alex Press, staff writer there at Jacobin Magazine. Make sure you check out the work that they do over there. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people on the talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.